Yeah, hi Ria. Hi guys. Yeah, hi Pragati. Okay, so let's wait for a few minutes, then we can go ahead with the session. Okay. Yeah, hi Sanju. So today's topic will be like we are going to talk about the routing stuff, and we have an API left, which is put API. So we are going to talk about that. Okay, so like my voice is clear, or is there any background noise? If anybody can confirm. Okay. Thank you, Dinesh. Okay. So let's wait for a minute, then we can start. Thank you, Priyanka. Yeah, you can try the React part too. Okay, so let's get started with today's session. Okay, so hi guys, Rahul this side. So today's session is going to be about like how can we implement multi-page like field in the single page application using one of the most popular packages, that is React Router. Okay, and also like today's session is going to be the final session of this complete series. So we have like so far we have gone through like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and much about React. Like covered all the essential concepts of React. Okay, so let's get started with this. Okay, so these are the topics that we are going to cover, like why routing is essential and the React. So in the previous sessions, we have talked about the React, the JSX elements, and the components, and how we can communicate where parent to child and child to parent. Managing the state, we can re-render the components and make our UI much more reactive using state and event handling. And yesterday we talked about the use effect. How can we handle the side effects, which is HTTP calls, be it local storage, using the timers, and how we can clean it up along the way. Okay, so at the end, we are going to take a quick look at the code, complete code. Okay, so meanwhile, so you can access the GitHub repository. The link is mentioned in the description box. So I have created another branch, which is like this branch. Okay, so like the code we do today will be pushed onto the main branch, but so that we can clean up the code. So you can access all of this, the complete playlist, and like if you don't know much about Git, like I've added a Git cheat sheet, so you can access that also. Okay, so the link of this GitHub repository is in the description box. Okay, so let's get started with our first thing, which is why routing. Okay, so well, like what is routing and why we want this particular stuff like routing in our React application. Okay, so if we look at this the app which we have created so far. Okay, so let me zoom it a bit. So if we go through like one component to another, like expenses to add expense to analytics, like if we are toggling between we have used the conditional rendering, right? So if we toggle one component to another, we are not changing the URL or any part of the URL. So let's say if you want to share your app with some other people. Okay, so let's say we have you have share the particular app, like that. Who will do that? Because you have not specified anything unique or identifier for this particular page. So let's say if I share this URL, I want the user to access this particular ad experience. So if I load it. So it will be initialized from the starting point. It won't be accessible from like 2 1 2. So you won't be able to bookmark it or add your feature provided by the Chrome. Like you won't be able to use any bookmark here. So that's why like routing is important here. So what is this for? Let's say, I guess it is a bit slow. Okay, so let's say we have this website, right? So if we have like if we want to go to another page, let's say I want to access this thing. Okay, so the network is lagging. Okay, give me a minute. Okay, I guess it will be better now. Okay, so like where were we? Okay, I guess the voice is audible. Okay, so let's say we have this traditional website. Okay, so if we want to go to another page, say this page. Okay, so if I click on this, I will be redirected to some other page. So let's say like this is the unique identifier of this particular page, right? So like if I share this URL with anyone, they will be able to access this particular page. So like whenever this page is loaded, so in what we do in traditional HTML flows, so we have like HTML files which is received by the browser. So like if we go to the network tab, let's say, yeah, so in the beginning we have this page which the browser received on the client side, this HTML page, so it is being rendered, right? But whenever we are redirected to some another page, so all these resources will be loaded again. So that won't be a a good thing, because it is like consuming like more of the resources. So that's where like the React comes in. So that's one of the reason we are using React to minimize our network calls. But like so far like the app which we have created does not support routing, right? So like React is a JavaScript based library, right? So whenever like it is being loaded, it contains only one page, which is index.html. So if we look at this code, let me zoom it up a bit. So in public folder, we have this index.html. So in single page application, we have only one index file which is being loaded. Once it is loaded, then all the control is shifted to the JavaScript. And the good thing is JavaScript has access to this particular URL, and it can be manipulated. Okay. So like to provide a very instant and responsive user experience, we are using React here, right? So let's add the routing stuff here. So few points which we can cover. So like by routing to make websites more dynamic and accessible, and enables navigation across apps, so we can navigate throughout the app easily without loading each and every page. And each page should have its own unique identifier, so it can be accessed from anywhere and by anyone. So let's say we have a URL add expense. So if you want to share it, like if you have a unique identifier for that particular URL, it can be easily shared and accessed. And it also helps in bookmarking, let's say the star. So if you want to bookmark a URL, you can do that with the help of routing. If the routing is not there, like the initial state will be bookmarked, right? So let's take a look at the React router. So first of all, like what is React router? So React router is a third-party package. Like a React does not have the routing functionality inbox, so we have to use this third-party package. And basically, this package is used for handling all the routing stuff. By handling, we mean like watching and manipulating the URL, and then rendering the components based on the URL. Okay, and let's install it. First of all, let's look at what it is. So this is the official website of React Router. So it is provided for web and native also. So for web, it basically enables us, for the client side routing. So here are the few examples that you can go through. Like they have pretty good documentation and all the APIs, the hooks, and all the components which we are going to use. Like mostly all of the components we are going to use here. Okay, so first we have to install this. Like we have created our app, so we have to install it. So let's copy this command. Okay, and go to our app. You can simply paste this command and let's load it. Okay, so meanwhile we can go through the documentation. What do they provide? We have this browser router. It's an API reversing the URL, so we can make much like it is essential for the routing stuff. We are going to take a look at that in a while. Okay, so it is installed. Okay, so let's hide it. And in packet.json, we can see like we have added the React router DOM. Okay, so let's make use of it. Okay, okay, so we can also remove the code which we are not using. So let's remove it. So we have this now. We can hide this for now. So to make accessible route, to register a route, basically what we have to use is a route. So this is the component which is provided by this package. So we have to import this. This is a named import route from React router DOM. Okay, so once it is imported, then it takes few parameters, few props basically. First is path, the path which we want to define. Okay, so let's first take a look at our application. So we have these things, the expenses, add expense, and analytics, right? So expenses should be on our base URL, like nothing, and add expense maybe should have this kind of URL like slash add, analytics maybe slash analytics. Okay, so you can have the nested routes, okay, and even dynamic routes. So we are going to take a look at that. So with these are the things that we are going to cover: the route component, the browser router, link nav link, dynamic routes, switching between multiple components using the switch component, redirection, wildcard, and the hooks. Okay, so let's get started with registering the route. Okay, so we have the path. Let's say this. I want this path and I want to add a component. So here's the thing, like you can add the component which you want to use here at this particular route. So I want this particular component to be rendered on this path. Similarly, like for the add slash add, I want the add expense component. Okay, and for the analytics, I just want to show just a text analytics page maybe, right? So but if we save it, it won't work because like to activate all the features of routing stuff, all the like to register routes and making use of these things, we need to add something in our root file. So let's go to our root file, and what we can do is we have to wrap our entire application into a component which is browser router, which is again a named import from the React router DOM. Okay, so let's import it. So now if we save it, we can expect like on this route, we are going to see the expenses. On this route, we are going to like see this particular component. So based on the URL, we are going to render this component. Okay, so let's save and see. Okay. Let's see. If you can see like we have rendered the component, but if you scroll a bit, you can see like we have this component, but we are also getting this particular expenseless component. So that's not we want. Like there may be cases like you want this kind of stuff, but we don't want it here. Like on add expense, like if the add expense is there, like this particular URL, I want just to render my form, and if there is nothing, then I want to like render this particular component. That is just working just fine. And if I have the analytics, so this thing is rendered, but this list is also there. So why it is being rendered? Because let's say like this path prop is basically nothing. It actually represents the starts with. Okay, so this particular URL is starting with the slash, right? So that's why this component is all like also being rendered, because like in this routing routing method, we are matching each and every basically component here. So if this is true, it will be rendered. If this is true, it will be rendered. So that's going on behind the scenes, right? So if we want to make it exact, so we can provide a parameter additional prop which is exact. Okay, so I want this exact route to like to render this particular component for this too and for this too. So there may be chances like when you don't want this exact, you want the kind of functionality which we are having, you want to render multiple components. So that's fine. Okay, so let's save and see. So now you see like we have this stuff here, right? So if we change the URL manually for now, so we can see like the component which we want to render is being rendered, right? So yes, we have started a bit. So let's say we like what we have like currently we are changing the URL manually. We want this URL to be manipulated by these buttons, by these links, right? So how can we do that? First of all, like we have to remove the existing logic, which is this. We can remove this date code. Okay. So currently we are setting the active item using the states. Okay. So for now we can remove this. Even remove this. Okay, so we can go in the sidebar component. So in sidebar component we have this item click handler. We don't need this anymore. Not the active item, just the sidebar list. We can remove this. And in this also we don't need this anymore. Okay, so in the sidebar list item we have the anchor link here, right? So there are two things which our React router provides. First is nav link and second is link. These two, link and nav link. So the difference between these two is, so link does not provide like you can style your basically link, and nav link in addition provides like you can style the links, and you can provide validations also. Like you can even provide the active class name. So if you want to check out like the features, exact features, you can go through these like the props that these nav link provide. Okay, so this is the usage. We have to import it. This is also a named import from the React router DOM. Okay. So what we can do is we can remove this. Okay. And we can import navlink. We are going to use navlink because we have to provide some styling also. Okay. So let's remove this. Before we do that, let's do one thing. We have this here, right? So let's save and see. So currently you can see like we have this app, right? So on this click, like if I click on this, it will be rendered. If I click on this, like again, like I am redirected to like the component which I want to. And in analytics, I am also being redirected to that particular page. But the essence of single page application is lost here, because like if you see, whenever I click on any particular URL, the complete app is being refreshed. All the resources are being loaded again. So this basically, like if there is an existing state, that will be lost if we are reloading our app. So we have to ensure like the app is not being reloaded and we are redirected to our component. So that's why we have to make use of these special components, which is navlink or link. If you want to style, you may have to use this navlink. Okay, so let's import it. Navlink from React Router DOM. And in this navlink, we don't have to provide the hyper reference, instead to, and which is equal to our path. And we have to provide an additional prop if you want to make it active. So if it is active, I want to provide the class active. Okay, so if we see now, okay, so currently my analytics page is being active. So if I inspect it and let's see, so we can see like we have this anchor tag here, even if we have used the navlink component, because now it is being handled by the React router. Okay, so and if the link is active, this particular class is being added. But we can see like in expenses also we have this active class. Why? Because like similar to the routing stuff, we also have to add the exact prop. If the exact URL matches, then we have to provide this class. Okay, So in addition, we can add this prop, which is exact, and let's save and see. So if we see now, like this page is being active, so it is being highlighted. If I click on add expense, it is being, active again. If I click on expenses, then it is being active. So now, like we are not doing this by using the state management stuff. Instead, we are making use of the routing, right? So if I click on this, it is being rendered to the, like it is being redirected to the add page, and my like add expense form is being loaded, right? In analytics, the analytics page, right? So this is the basics of routing, so which we have covered. So let's move forward. Now the dynamic routes, yeah, good stuff. So let's say now, okay, so just let me know like if there is some like problem or like any confusion here, you can just put in the comment box. Okay, so now we have this list, right? So we are fetching the data directly from the Firebase real-time database, right? And add expense, when we add the data, it is being added using the post API. And if we delete it, it will be deleted, right? Now the thing left is we want to like edit this. So if I want to edit this, what can I expect? Let's say if I click on this edit, I want to redirect it to the same page, this page, edit, but with a different route. The route may be, edit slash maybe the ID of the thing, right? We can make use of the additional parameters or query parameters, but let's stick to this thing. Okay. So I want to redirect it to slash edit slash ID2, or it can be any ID relative to that particular list item. So if I click this now, so no component is being rendered, right? Because I have not defined any particular component relative to this route, right? So we can define a component here. Okay, so let's go in app.js. Let's define a component where I want to give it starting with edit, and I want to define it a ID, right? So how can I define ID? Because the ID is pretty dynamic. So we can do it by adding a special thing, which is a mandatory thing, a colon, a single colon basically, and then we have to specify the parameter which you will be expecting in your component. So it can be anything, but this colon is mandatory. Okay, so let's say I want this just to be the ID. Okay, so now let's go to this add expense component. Okay, okay, so before going to this particular component, what we can do is we can go to our expense item component, and whenever I click on this edit button, I want to navigate like to this particular page. Okay, so we have seen like how to make use of nav link or link, so we can make use of this here to navigate it, but I'm going to use like navigate it programmatically using the imperative way. Okay, so when I click on this, what I want to do is I want to maybe navigate it. So let's create a function with navigate to. Okay, and I'm sending the, we have the item, so we don't need this. So we can just do one thing. We can create a function, navigate to, and in this function, what we are doing is we want to navigate it. So how we can navigate it? We can make use of a hook which is provided by the React router. Okay, which is use history. Okay, so it is also a named import from React router DOM. So once we get this, like there are several things, several functions in this. So let's say the push, like basically the routing, like the router is a basically a stack which contain multiple pages. So as you like go move forward, so it will be added on top of your stack. So we want to push a page, you can replace it, you can replace it also. So we are going to push it. So what are we going to do? We want to push it to edit and the ID in this item. So we can do this. Okay, so now let's save and see what it does. Okay. So we have the list. So if I click on this, I expect it to be redirected to slash edit and the ID of this particular item. Okay. So as we can see, like it is being redirected, right? So that's the step one. And now what we want. So we want like whenever we are redirected to this, our component should be rendered like this, but like instead of add, we can add like something like edit. So it will be, much more descriptive and all the fields to be pre-filled. with this ID data, right? So we can make use of a ID like a API by which is basically going to fetch the data like by this ID. Okay, so let's do it. Okay, so in add expense form, like once we go there, so we want to know like whenever we are receiving this particular ID, we want to know like which operation is this, whether it can be edit or it can be add, right? If it is edit, then we are receiving this ID. But if it is add operation, we do not expect any ID because we are adding the data. Okay, so for that, what we can do is in the routing, we can also make this dynamic. So instead of this, we can define the operation here add. So we are defined this parameter. Now this value should be add. It should not be dynamic other than add. If it is other than add, it won't be matched. This route won't be matched. Okay, so similarly for this, we can define a parameter which should be edit. So now for these two routes, if we like look at these, so the operation should be add here. Okay, so if we want to define multiple operations, let's say you have multiple operations, maybe view, so you can define this by using a pipe operator here. Okay, so but I want to use just the add. Okay, so in add expense form, what we can do is whenever we render this component, we can fetch the type of operation, and if it is add, I'm going to like I'm not going to pre-fill these values. So if the operation is going to edit, what I want is I want to basically like extract this ID, and based on this ID, I want to fetch the data. Okay, so let's go to this component now. Let's remove the stuff. Also remove because we are not expecting any parameters here. Okay, so I'm removing all the dead code here. So we can make use of a special hook which is being provided by the React router, which is use params, because like these are the params like edit here, like this ID. These are the parameters, not the query parameters. Query parameters basically starts with question mark and your, let's say, query. This is your key and the value here. Okay, so we are making use of parameters, not the query parameters. Okay, so if we make a use of these, say the cons params and this. Okay, so now what I want is we have to make use of a side effect. Okay, so which is use effect. So whenever the parameters are being changed, I want to do something. Let's say like this is the thing which we have studied about in the previous session. Use effect used for handling the side effects, and this is the dependency I'm providing. Whenever the parameter changes in the URL, I want to execute some code. Okay, so what we can do is we can check if params dot operation. Okay, so before accessing that, let's log what parameter contains. Okay, so let's say and see. So we can see like this contains the ID and the operation here, right? So we have the edit operation and the relative ID. So if I click on add expense, now the operation is had. There is no ID. Great, right? So we can go back and we can create a, say, operation state, basically set operation. Okay, you can make use of this param directly, or you can create a state. That's totally up to you. So default state would be add. I'm just defining a default state, which is add. Okay, so if params dot operation is equal to edit, then what I want to do is I want to set my operation to params dot operation. Okay, so that's a start. So in else, what we can do, so else means like apart from this, basically the alternative logic. So instead of else, we can do the memory cleanup. So let's say if this component is being rendered again, we can like clean all the memory, set to default state, right? So we can do that instead of else. So we can return else, which is just a cleanup function which will be executed on the subsequent renders, not the first time. Okay, so what we can do is set the operation to add. We can even set form processing to false. Basically, like set all the default values. Okay, so we can set is valid form to true. I guess the default value is true. Yeah, and in this we can define this. We can reset the form if the state changes. Okay, because we don't want like if there is some update, we don't want to use the previous data. We want the new data, right? So I guess this is done. So we have set the operation, right? So what we can do is instead of this add, we can make use of this operation value. So let's make it uppercase. We can also send this operation in this particular thing, operation, and go to this. Let's remove this also. Okay. So in this thing, we are also receiving a parameter which is operation now. Okay. So if I want to edit it, so like the proper flow should be like I should not be getting this clear button, and instead of add expense, I should be getting maybe edit expense or update expense, something like that, right? So we can do one thing. We can check if operation is edit, basically not equal to edit. We want to render this button, the clear button, like if the operation is edit or add, then we want to render it. And in this, we can again make the uppercase. Right. So let's save and see. Yep. So like in add expense, if the route is add, I'm getting this add expense log, add expense. So you can create a some other function to make only the first character, capital and rest of the character. Okay. So let's see, go back and edit it. So as we can see, like we get this edit expense log, edit expense, and we are not seeing the clear button because we are conditionally rendering the things. Okay. So reach router versus React router. Okay, so we'll get on this in a bit once this is completed. Okay. So we have this component here. Okay. So now I want to add some additional logic, which is basically, let's say when I'm on this route, edit expense, then I want to fetch the details related to this ID. So how can we do that? So in use effect, we are getting this if parameter, like we are getting in this block, right? So we can define a service, right? We can define a service or a function, which will basically call the API relative to this thing. So we can do this like fetch expense by ID. So this function name is descriptive enough, right? So we are expecting an ID, right? So we can copy this thing and like we have to define like it is Firebase specific, right? So the Firebase, like this is the collection name. So we have to provide a slash and then the ID.json so that we can access that particular object in the Firebase real-time database. Okay. So once we get the response, we are converting it to JSON. So if the response is not okay, we are throwing the error, or if the data is null, if there is no data, then again we are throwing an error, right? So that we can show some page like the page not found or the document is not available, something like that, right? If the data is there, then I want to return the data. That's it, right? So maybe we want to transform the data also. Let's say the complete data and the ID which we are receiving. So this is the data and the fetch expense by ID. So we can go there and see fetch expense by ID, right? So as we can see, like in the params object, which we are using here, like the use params, we are also receiving ID, right? So what we can do is params.id, then it is a promise based, right? We have an async function in place, so it will always return a promise. So we are getting the data. So we can see like if the data is available, because like we are throwing if the data is not available or if there is any kind of error. So if there is data, we can set the expense data. equal to the data, and maybe we can initially show a loader, right? So I can set the form processing to be true initially, and then once the data is being loaded, we can set it to false. Then if there is any kind of error, so what we can do is maybe log the error for now, or you can handle the error in a better way according to your needs. Maybe show a modal redirected to some page or something like that. We can log it, right? And along with logging, what I want is like if there is any other error, I don't want to show this form because it does not make any sense. Like if this ID does not exist, I don't want to show this form. Instead, I want to show a message like, let's say this page does not exist or the ID is not available. So we can do this by creating another variable. So let's say name it not found for now. So set not found to state. So initially it is undefined, right? So if there is any error, we can set not found to true. You can initially define the value to be false, right? Okay. So while cleaning it up, we can also set not found to false. Okay, so there won't be any anomaly. Okay, so now let's save and see. Great. So if you can see, like due to the hot reloading, so if we go back and let's say I want to edit this grocery list. Okay, so you can see like once like I render like as soon as this page is being loaded, this component is being loaded, the use effect, the function defined in the use effect is executed, and we have the parameter edit. So if the operation is edit, what I'm doing is I am setting the form processing and operation to be edit, and then get fetching the data by ID. So if I reload it again, so if you can see like the data is being loaded, you can see the API call even. So if you see, go there, you can see the API call, right? And the data we are getting directly from the real-time database. Okay, so like half of the work is done here. Like we are getting the data, and we are also, that's where like a two-way binding comes in handy, because the data we are getting, we are just assigning those values. So it will be a bit, it will also like it will be already loaded into that fields because of the two-way binding here, right? So now what we want is when I let's say let's change. So if I click on edit expense, I want this particular data to be updated. So currently, like if I click on this, a new data will be added because we have the submit handler in place, this particular handler. So in this handler, we have not put that particular logic. Let's say if we are whether we are updating or we are adding the adding the data, right? And one more thing, let's say handling this particular case. Let's say if this ID does not exist. So let's say what is the response. So if we open up the log, so we can say like something went wrong because this ID does not exist on the database. So what we can do is we can check here. Okay, so not it here. After this use effect, if not found is true, then we can just return something which is not found. ID not found. Okay, then we are returning this. We are not rendering this particular thing. Okay, so let's save and see. So you can see, right? So if the ID does not exist, we are rendering the fallback case, which is nice, right? You can, style it or do it according to your needs. So if this is a valid ID, then the component will be rendered, right? Great. Okay. So let's do the another thing, like how can we update this thing? So let's go back and we can put the same logic here in submit handler. We can see like if like our operation is edit, then what I want is I want to edit the expense. So we can create another service, which is nothing but like an API call, which is maybe update expense by ID async. We are expecting an ID here, right? what we can do is we can copy this stuff. Along with ID, we are all expecting the payload because we need the payload to update it, right? So instead of post call, it will be a put call. Okay. So we are like in payload, we are getting all the things. So even if like a single field is changed, the complete object will be updated with that particular key. So we are returning like if the response is okay, we are returning true. Otherwise, we are throwing an error. Okay. So we can make use of this. We can consume this API. Okay. So let's go back and see. Okay. So we can update expense by ID. So it is expecting two things. First is params.id. Second is the payload, which is the expense data, right? Okay. Then it is a promise. It will always return a promise as it is a async function. So if it is returning, not any error, so what we can do is maybe we can log it. Let's say data updated and do nothing. If there is any error, what we can do is we can also log something error and show the relative error. It's totally up to like how you want to handle it. Okay. And then we can just put all of this stuff in the else block. So we have the edit operation in place in the else. Okay, so now if we update the thing, if we update the expense, so it will be like went through this logic will be executed. So once we get the success response, we may want to set the form processing to be false, right? So let's save and see. So now we get the data right. So now let's say if I want to change the list, let's change edit expense. So data is updated, right? So we can see here, right? The expense tracker. Okay, so we have updated the complete data. Too bad. Okay, so we have done something wrong here. Something went wrong. Okay, yes, we have to put the ID here because we need to update this particular ID only, right? So we have to provide the ID. That's the only thing that went wrong. So what we can do is we can delete these fields and add the data again. Because if I load this in the front end, it will throw an error because we are expecting an object, not this key value pairs. Okay, so now let's add the data. Okay, so maybe grocery items, list, amount, date, type is debit. So if I add the data, we have the data in here. So if I want to edit it, I just can change the list to list changed. Let's see. The data is updated and we can see here like the list is changed. This particular key is updated, right? So that's how we can update the key based on the parameters, based on the routing. So we can also use multiple alternate ways. Maybe this will be a query parameter, not the parameter. So it's totally up to you how you want to implement the logic, right? So let's clean our app a bit so to make it more readable. Okay. So I guess we have all things in place. We can remove this. Okay. And we can also add for multiple expenses, maybe some bill, add the date. So we have also added a validation. If the date is greater, the form will be invalidated, right? So we can type debit, added. So we can see like all the things are being updated in real time. And if we have a particular route, we can go to this route and make changes of this. But still like there is one thing that is missing essentially. Okay, so we have these routes in place. But if we are not putting exact parameter, exact prop here, so multiple routes can be rendered, right? So we don't want to like utilize this. We want to utilize only one route at a time. So we can put this switch statement here, the switch component, which is again provided by the React router. Okay, and just like as soon as like it does not based on some specificity, it basically like if this route is matched, this will be loaded and the switch statement will be exited, right? So we can like we have like exported it, imported it basically. So now we can like it works in the same way, but if we remove the exact from here, all the routes will be redirected to this page. We can see that, right? Because we have removed the exact parameter. So we have to give this parameter if this is the kind of functionality you want. Okay, so now we have implemented the routing, and based on the routing, we are rendering the components. So let's say if you want to share this particular URL, you can just give it to anyone, and if they load it, they will be landed on this particular page, right? So it makes them easy to access this page without going through the manual part. So it is a kind of a good thing if you have the routing, because it also helps in search engine optimizations if you have some metadata in place, right? We can even further optimize it. So let's say if you have this path, and let's say if there is some other path, let's say not found or any other path, so how can you handle that? Because we are not handling this route, right? So that's where this comes in, the wildcard routes. Okay, so how can we define one? So we can define one by path, which is star, and we want to render not found. So you can even specify a component here, but I'm just rendering a paragraph tag with not found. Okay, so you like make sure you never put this at the top of your switch thing, because if you do this, all explain like all the routes will be not found. Make sure you put it in the end, because it is a wild card, and it will be like if no route will be matched, then it will be gone in this particular component. Okay, so let's say we have this. So let's enter like maybe add 123. So we will be redirected to not found, right? And if you have a special page, let's say you want to redirect your users from one page to another, so you can make use of the redirect thing, which is a permanent redirection. So let's say I want to make use of this redirect. Okay, so this is also a named import, which is basically provided by the React router. So what I want is from. So these accept two props, from and to, basically the source and the destination. So let's say I want to redirect from to maybe dashboard. Okay, so let's see if I have this. So we can see like it is there. So we can put exact here. Okay, so currently it is being not rendered because we have to put it at the starting, because we want to redirect this thing, right? Let's save and see. Okay, let me debug it a bit. Let's comment it. Yeah, so the basic thing is working fine. Okay. Okay, so I'm doing something wrong. Dashboard. Yeah. So if I have the dashboard, I want it to be redirected to my base page basically. Okay. So I guess we have covered few things here, like the wildcard thing, the redirect thing, and basically rendering of a single component only based on the route matching. It will be working on the first come first serve. Let's say if we have multiple routes, the first route which is matched, it will be rendered. The dynamic routes which we can provide by specifying a parameter and a colon, and the link and nav link to basically linking between the pages so we can navigate throughout. Browser router, so we can activate all the features which is provided by the React router, and the route components basically to specify the path to register a route. Okay, and the routing hooks which we have used, like use history, use location, use parents, so we can make use of these hooks. And okay, so I guess our application is pretty is working in a pretty good state, right? So we have listed all the expenses. We have the add expense form. We have the analytics. Like we are not doing any analytics though, right? So we can delete it, right? So we can even edit it. So whatever we want to do, we can do it. It's basically a complete CRUD application. So we can do all the things like create, update, read, and delete, right? So let's uh, okay, so regarding your question, Nikhil, Reach router versus React router. So Reach router is basically a older version, which is although compatible, and it works just fine if you want to use it. But React router is much more optimized way. It also supports hooks. Like previously, like it was not supported. So in React 17, if you have 16 or 17 plus, you can make use of hooks in your React application. Okay, so I guess the application is completed here. So we have a full-fledged working basic application here, right? So let's quickly go through the complete application. And if you guys have any questions, you can ask it right away. Okay. So in our React application, we have this public folder, which in turns contain a single HTML file, which is always being rendered. Okay, then we make it dynamic using the JavaScript, using like it is totally up to basically React takes over and handles all the routing stuff, right? So we have this index.js file in which we have this browser router to activate all the routing features and the app component. So in app component, if we go, we have this sidebar component which helps us in navigating throughout the app. We have the switch statement and multiple routes. We have redirected, like when a user lands on a particular route, I want it to be redirected to this path. I have a add path, which is basically add expense, and the edit, like if you want to edit the expense, we are using this approach. And this is where like wildcard, if the route is not found, right? So we have these multiple components which are being rendered based on the route. Whenever the route changes, it is being rendered, right? So I guess the application here is done, right? So I'll be pushing the complete code onto the GitHub. You can check it out. Okay. So I guess we have covered all of this stuff here. I know like all of this stuff like may not be like go right into your vein, but you have to like practice it. Maybe you can go through the official documentation, play with it around a bit, and you can make use of like you have to like start somewhere. So like in this complete tutorial, like we have talked about the basics, and we have covered a lot of important things, right? So I guess all the things are done here. So I'll be pushing the complete code on the main branch of this GitHub repository. Okay, and the link of this GitHub repository is in the description box, which you can find out. Okay, so using the Firebase, like Firebase is completely free. Like for this stuff, like using the real-time database, you can create an account and play with it, yeah, like using the APIs without creating an actual backend. Okay, so I guess the app here is complete, right? So, okay. So we can wrap this session, I guess. If you guys any sort of question, you can ask it. Okay. And meanwhile, so if you have any questions, like let's say if you have any doubts, you can reach to me on LinkedIn. So this is my LinkedIn profile, and again the link is in the description box. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. So if you have any questions, you can just ping me on that. Okay. So I guess we are done here. So okay, just a second. Just a second. Okay, so screen share is stopped. Okay, no issues. So I guess we are done with the session anyway. So hope you guys like have some productive knowledge throughout this course. So I'll talk to like so I'll try to create a playlist. So you can like go through the complete playlist if you want to. Okay. So I guess that's all I have for now. So bye guys. and stay safe. You can, like, if you have any doubt, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Okay, bye.